The final chapter of Genesis is shrouded in mist and darkness. The book that begins in heaven, ends in Egypt, where slavery is a reality, even long before a new king arose who did not know Joseph. In the final days of Jacob's life, he met his beloved son again. In the earliest meeting, he is sworn to do kindness and truth to his father and not to his grave in Egypt. In the later meeting, it is when Jacob is sick before his death, and Joseph's two sons stand in the center of the meeting. As we know, Joseph, son of Jacob, was deputy to the king of Egypt and managed the empire with a high hand. Joseph married Asenath, a high-born, aristocratic Egyptian woman, and they had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Despite growing up in royal status among the Gentiles, these special children remained faithful to God and His ways. Although all the jobs in government were available to them and the Egyptian aristocracy was happy to marry their daughters, Manasseh and Ephraim did not get confused and followed the faith of their grandfather, Jacob. Ephraim and Manasseh had the privilege of ascending to the level of Jacob's sons, the generation that preceded them, as Jacob told Joseph. "Now then, your two sons born to you in Egypt before I came to you here will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine." Genesis 48 verse 5. In the interpretation, Manasseh was his father's right hand in empire management, and young Ephraim studied the Bible with his grandfather, Jacob. The two brothers saw each other's qualities and were happy for each other. They did not harbor jealousies, feelings of pride, or condescension toward one another, and they did not compete with one another. When a severe drought began in the land of Canaan, Joseph's brothers Benjamin and Simeon went to Egypt to find them an estate to live in, and then Joseph, who had been betrayed by them, appeared before them. But Joseph shed youthful pride, arrogance, and narcissism, and showed humility, compassion, and forgiveness. Joseph admitted that everything that happened to him was the result of a divine mission and vocation. The heavy suffering that all those involved went through not only refined them but also changed them and allowed them to fulfill their destiny. From a dreamer, he becomes a dream solver, and when he was 17, he was sold into slavery, and became a governor and vice-king of Egypt in a foreign land as a result of his dream-solving abilities. When Joseph met his brother and saw that his dreams were true, he also hurried to invite his father to come to him. "Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay.'" Genesis 45 verse 9. It was not a temporary decline until the end of the famine because Jacob could not withstand the shocks of the way back due to his extreme age. After all, he arrived in Egypt 130 years old when the famine was supposed to continue for another 5 years. Jacob would not agree to part with Joseph again, and Joseph could not leave Egypt now. Therefore Jacob and his family had to live in Egypt at least until Jacob died. Jacob went to Egypt not as a starving refugee, but as a father invited to come in a chariot of honor by the Egyptian rulers. Now, when he left the land, he actually ascended spiritually, because for a long time, he did not have such a conversation with God. This is actually the first revelation he had since losing Joseph. Jacob knew many troubles in his life, including the loss of his beloved wife, and the loss of his beloved son, therefore Jacob believed that his son was his deputy. The grief he felt for bowing to his father caused him to cry on his father's neck. Thus, his dream came true. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." Genesis 37 verse 9. Jacob is the sun. When his father looked at him and recognized him, he wept over him, as he had wept until now when he thought he was dead. So he said, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Genesis 46 verse 30. Then Joseph informs Jacob that he has 2 sons. Jacob was surprised and happy with his 2 grandchildren, and all his attention shifted from what happened to Joseph in the years that Joseph disappeared from him to his 2 children. When Jacob was on his way to Egypt, God promised him, "I am God, the God of your father," he said. "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there." Genesis 46 verse 3. When Jacob came to Egypt, he met 2 grandchildren that he didn't know about, and these grandchildren promised him more fruitfulness than God had promised him. At the second meeting before Jacob's death, 17 years later, Joseph visited his sick father with his 2 sons, and Jacob decided that Joseph's 2 sons would inherit him as his sons had. As Jacob embraces and blesses Joseph's sons, he says, "Any children born to you after them will be yours. In the territory they inherit they will be reckoned under the names of their brothers." Genesis 48 verse 6. And what bothered him was not what had happened to Joseph since they separated, but the future of his new grandchildren. Jacob did not ask Joseph, "What happened to you?" He looked to the future, to the sons of Joseph, and also to the future of his family, where they could prosper without being assimilated. As his father gives the blessing, Joseph realizes his father's vision is impaired and corrects him. Joseph had already learned what terrible results can result from discrimination. When Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased, so he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to him, "No, my father, this one is the firstborn, put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations." Genesis 48 verses 17 to 19. 136 years old Jacob was unable to return to Canaan. He also did not want to say goodbye to Joseph again, and Joseph would not have received permission to leave Egypt. Over the course of 22 years, Jacob mourned Joseph without a grave, and during this time, his brothers refused to admit their sin or inform Jacob that his son might still be alive. In all, Jacob lived only 34 good years, 17 years with Joseph from Joseph's birth until his sale, and 17 years in Egypt since they met in Egypt. He raised Joseph until he was 17 years old, and then he met him again when he was 39 years old. It was the Lord who restored Jacob's 17 years in which he raised, educated, and was both a father and a mother to Joseph. When they separated, Jacob was the father of the family, and when they met again, Joseph was the viceroy of Egypt. While Joseph was sold into slavery, his family in Egypt survived thanks to this. Jacob left his sons a will divided into 4 parts before he died. 1. Jacob asked Joseph not to bury him in Egypt. 2. Jacob blessed Joseph, and also his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. 3. Jacob blessed his 12 sons. 4. Jacob ordered Joseph and all his sons to bury him in the cave of the patriarchs. "I went down to Egypt for you, and you will bring my bones back home." He asked Joseph for it because as the viceroy he could do it. Despite Joseph's promise to Jacob, Jacob was so anxious not to be buried in Egypt that he asked him to swear. "But when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried." "I will do as you say," he said. "Swear to me," he said. Then Joseph swore to him, and Israel worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Genesis 47 verses 30 to 31. It appears that Joseph's brothers approved of his choice because they saw it as a meager reward for what they had done to Joseph. Jacob decided that birthright is not a status associated with birth, but a status given to a son due to his skills and the responsibility he shows. It is not the birth order that determines, but rather the personality, personal ability, behavior, and actions. When Jacob blessed the boys, he actually adopted them as his own sons. And this is why the Israelites count as 12 tribes of Israel and not 11. It is not for nothing that Ephraim and Manasseh were blessed with the blessing they are blessed with. Brothers, who did not hate and envy, are blessed with their blessing. Now, when there is brotherhood in the family, it can become a nation. We hope you learned something new today. If you did, give this video a like and share it with your friends. You can share with us what you know by leaving a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more informative and entertaining content. Thank you so much and see you next time.